Darren and I right now are standing by the edge of a field where there's some trees just off to the side, and anytime we've got some trees right next to a soybean field, for example, we get really concerned about our weed of the week, buckthorn.
All right, here's why. Because in soybeans, one of the worst problems that we see is soybean aphid. And where do the aphids overwinter? On buckthorn, right here in our trees.
Right. So this particular field that we're standing in, a lot of times this is where we get soybean aphids first. So we're trying to keep an eye around our shelter belts, around any of the trees, because a lot of times we'll find some buckthorn in there. And if I could only get Darren to kill this weed, then we wouldn't have so many overwintering soybean aphids. But here's the problem. How are you going to kill buckthorn in the middle of the summer in a shelter belt without damaging the trees?
All right, so you got a woody species out in the woods. This is really tough. Now, if you have all kinds of time, I mean, if you could just have time stand still and you really enjoyed running a chainsaw, well, you could run out there and just hack every one of those little buckthorn bushes off and you wouldn't have this weed of the week at all. But we don't really have that kind of time. If it just would grow in the fence lines, no big deal. We can deal with it in fence lines, but when it's in amongst trees, the best options for killing trees, well, they aren't really specific about killing one tree and not the other.
Okay, so what we're talking about here is, let's say buckthorn's out in your pasture, your ditch, your fence line, something like that. Toradon's the best way to go. Certainly there are some other options out there. There's chaparral and other products, other brush type products. I personally like Toradon the best. It's got tremendously long residual, but like Darren said, it does kill trees. So you can't spray Toradon for buckthorn out in trees or your trees are dead also.
All right, so what do you do? Well, that's a good question. Maybe your solution is I'm going to spot spray some Roundup out there. How good a job will Roundup do on a woody species like this? It's not going to do nearly as well as it does on normal.
How about 2,4-D though?
Well, 2,4-D you can kind of fry leaves off, but it's not really going to kill it completely, and that's what makes it such a challenge. The other thing is these aphids, and you may say, okay, well, is the buckthorn really causing a problem for you out in the trees? Not really. It's not really bothering us so much there. What's bothering us is that's where our aphids are overwintering. So what we can do is do a bang-up job on the aphids in the fields. We can also, as Brian mentioned, just keep an eye on these areas and watch them and see, you know, hey, are the aphids moving in from those areas? Or as we get towards the end of the season, not give up on our soybeans. So many times we see guys, well, you know, we're at R5 and I don't know if it's really worth spraying for aphids. Maybe in those areas you do, so we don't reinfest the buckthorn over the winter with aphids.
All right, well, once again, our weed of the week is buckthorn, and unfortunately we don't have a great way to control it in your trees, unless maybe it's really small, maybe some 2,4-D or something like that in the early spring or late fall, something like that. But otherwise, just kind of keep in mind, buckthorn supports soybean aphids, so anywhere you've got trees, anywhere you've got buckthorn, that's where you got to spray aphids typically first.
Let's turn our focus out of the trees and back into the field. Our Iron Talk is coming up next.